In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to turn your drawing into a grayscale painting. And this was the drawing I did for the drawing tutorial. But I decided for my grayscale painting, I would go with this drawing here because I just think it's a stronger drawing. And as I was stating in the tutorial, it's kind of hard to talk and draw at the same time, or at least for me. And so, I'm going to go with the better drawing. So I'm not going to save this. Okay, I don't need to save that. So anyway, uh, where we're going to get to this point, it's by the end of the tutorial, and the way we got to get started here is we got to start building flat shapes. And I kind of have one built already, and we've done this before with the ink and the digital ink and paint tutorial with the mouse on the clock, but it's slightly different because with the digital inking tutorial, the contours of these shapes did not have to be so refined because they were being hidden by the line work on top, okay, by the inking. So let me get started here. So what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to take your drawing, condense any layers or get rid of any layers you don't need, and then basically I have a layer up underneath here we can start working on. And actually, I'm going to leave that for my background layer later on when I start painting. So I'm going to make a new layer actually, and we're going to need, much like our other tutorial here with doing the digital ink and paint, we're going to need a nice sharp brush. We can use a hard round brush, but I like using these manga brushes. They go a little faster. And here's the deal. We need the opacity and flow set at 100%. I'm going to set my color here. If you look over here at your color, let me go back to my color here. You may see it set up like this, RGB. We may see, let me see if I can see the whole thing here, because usually you'll see the whole thing, or you might see CMYK depending on what your document is. You can do RGB spectrum, kind of like that. I just set it up like this so it makes it easier, and that is I use these grayscale sliders. So in your color palette, you want to go over here to your options and go down to grayscale sliders because it's going to make your job much faster when you paint. And I'm going to set this first one to around maybe 50%. We won't need to be looking at this while we're working. We're going to be looking at some of the photos. Like we can look at this one, which is a drawing. We can look at this one. I looked a lot at this one while I was painting this one. It depends on what you need to look at. Now here's the deal. Later you're going to need to pick off color. And what I did is I used an adjustment layer for this photo. So I just made an adjustment layer that was set to black and white. And when you do that, it's just an adjustment layer sitting on top of that photo. So therefore, later on, when you need to use that photo for color, it'll still be there, okay? I just wanted to point that out. So first thing we're going to do over here is we're going to go to our drawing layer, and we're going to lower the opacity quite a bit. And then we'll go down to the layer underneath it, and we're going to need to start drawing in, and I'm going to draw this face shape. And we need to think about in terms of when we draw, we need to think in terms of what is overlapping, if there's anything overlapping it. And so that's most important. And so, and the other thing too is we want to improve the contour. And I'm going to make my brush a little smaller here as I go along here, because this is so important. Because yeah, you can improve your contour afterwards, but you're going to have your pixels locked when you paint. Now let me get a hard round brush here to kind of erase out with. But we really need to take our time here and do a nice contour drawing. Oops. Oh, I got it set to that. That's why. There we go. So we'll go all the way around the face like this. And I find that making these long sweeping strokes kind of makes it a little smoother. But I'm going to turn off the drawing here a moment. I'm going to close up my brushes so I can see. But sometimes it's important to turn off that drawing and zoom in here closely so we can see if anything needs to be corrected, okay? I've got my eraser right now. And this is so key because, like I said, when we're doing it before with the digital inking, we just didn't have to worry about what the contour quality of these shapes are. And we're starting in grayscale versus color for a good reason. That is, it's a lot easier when you're trying to make something look realistic and you're having to shade. It's a lot easier if you're not familiar with painting to do it in grayscale, okay? That is so key because, when I first started learning how to do digital painting like this, I always started in grayscale until I got much better and I had a good idea of what my colors are like. I still use this technique today if I'm doing something that I don't know what the color is going to be. Like anytime I do like a robot design, and I do a lot of robot designs where I design them myself, and then I have to figure out all the shading on them. Well, it's a lot easier to do that in grayscale and then add color. And coloring is not that hard. It's not that difficult. So what I'm going to do here, as you can see, is I'm just taking a big swipe here and closing this up. Now, you've got a paint bucket over here. Like in Procreate, you could always drag your color in there and it will fill it. Well, this will do this. The only problem is this problem right here. And therefore, you have to go back all the way around and clean that up, which is okay. But I'm going to show you a technique I've done before, and that is we'll get the magic wand, okay? And the magic wand, the keyboard shortcut is W, but this is where it is on your toolbar here. If you take a look here, it's right up under the quick selection tool. So we'll do W, we bring that up. We'll click inside here. Now here's the problem. I'm going to do Alt-Delete and then deselect, but you still get the same problem, okay? So what I'm going to do is I am going to, before I fill it, I'm going to go to Select, and I'm going to go to Modify. Oops, that's border. Go to Select, and then Modify, and then we're going to Expand. And we'll expand this by a few pixels. Now, it may take time each time we do this, but I actually developed a keyboard shortcut for this, okay? I'm going to do Alt-Delete here. But my keyboard shortcut is set up, just to show you. I went up under Edit, Keyboard Shortcuts, and I went under Select, and all the way under here where it says Modify, I decided to go with F6, which was Show Color. That shows the color palette. That's what F6 did. And I said, I don't need that. I can show the color palette without having to use a keyboard shortcut. So it makes my job a lot easier because basically, let me do Command D here. I just do W, click here, and then F6, and then I expand like that, and then I do Alt-Delete, and boom, and then I deselect. And therefore, that's all filled in, very clean. Now, we may need to go back through here and do some cleaning up. And that is so key in doing this. And let me turn off our layer here so we look. And one other thing I want to point out here, and I'm going to tell you this several times here, is that with this exercise, you should really kind of take the time to do a nice painting because this is actually going to be yours. Meaning that, all the other exercises I've done before in this class, I've supplied the drawing, I have done the design of whatever we're doing, and you just copy what I'm doing. Yeah, you're copying the same technique I'm doing here, but it's your drawing. However you decide to have drawn him, so it makes it your artwork. And so, in the other cases of the exercises, you would never put those in your portfolio because they just weren't strong enough and they weren't personal. But in this case, if you actually take the time, this could be something you actually could apply in your portfolio. And that's why I'm actually going through here and showing you about cleaning things up and trying to get a nice, smooth, even contour all the way around this before we move on. Okay, so what I generally do is I will actually make different layers for different things. And one thing I like to do is I always like to make a nose layer. Now, I may not paint on that nose layer, but the reason I make a nose layer is because it will make my job, because this contour of the nose right here, and I'm using a lighter gray. I'm going to actually make it even lighter so we can see it better. This contour that I'm tracing out over, we want to be able to get to so that we can, have a nice sharp edge on the nose up underneath it. Let's zoom in here. I'm going to erase out. Oops. You know what? I didn't make a nose layer. All right. Well, you know what? Instead of undoing, I'm just going to lock my pixels, do this, and do Alt-Delete. Boom. So my pixels are locked on this layer now. And so I can paint inside without anything going on. So I need to make a new layer. So let's make this one below the face. We'll make this one the nose. Okay? And I did that before when I was playing around and doing it earlier. I made the same mistake. It happens, so again, we just want to do a nice, clean, and it's nice to take these long, sweeping strokes if possible when you make this. And sometimes it's better to zoom out just a little bit, because when you're up close, it's hard to take these long, clean, strokes with your brush to get that nice edge. And so, we want to work on this, and that's why your drawing is so key. You want to have a strong enough drawing so when you're doing this, you'll come up with better shapes in the long run. And I'm just trying to clean this up here. And then we want to do the bridge of the nose. And then this part is not so important. This part of the nose really isn't that important. I'm just going to cover here because we're just, it is when we paint it, but the contour isn't. So let me make sure I've got everything here. Might as well just fill this in really quickly, like this. Then I'm going to hit the W key for Magic Wand, and then hit the F6 key, and then expand it, and then do Alt-Delete, and now I can move on. Okay, but before we move on, always go back in here and check out the contour, okay? That is so key here. And that is very important. And like I said, if you really like your drawing that you've done for this one, then you want to take your time to do a nice, clean contours. And I'm making sure that my brush is set at 100%. And there we go. Okay, so that's my nose layer. All right. And, it might not be the best. I'm not going to use this one, by the way. I'm just showing you how to set this up. So the next thing we would do is we would do the eyes. And I'm going to make a new layer for the eyes. And that is the white of the eyes. And we might as well go practically down to white. And work on that shape. And clean that up a bit. This shape is so small we could just do this. Unless you want to just get all that right there and clean this edge up as best as possible, and then turn your drawing off. It's always important to turn your drawing off while you do this. And let's see here, almost done. Like I said, I shouldn't be too much of a perfectionist since I already have this done, but like I said, I think it's important if you're going to do a nice painting, you want to have all these silhouette shapes set up. Now, in the olden days of airbrushing, you may know about airbrushing, have heard of it, but people still use airbrush. But there used to be a lot of airbrush paintings done before the computer, and the problem with doing an airbrush painting versus doing an oil painting was that you'd always have to cut out these friskets so that you'd have these masks that you could prevent the airbrush from painting into, okay? And that was a time-consuming part of doing airbrush artwork, was actually having to do what we're doing here, masking this out. And again, we'll turn off the drawing. We'll clean it up a little bit like this. May need to erase. All right, and let's zoom out here. And I like to flip it to see what the shapes are like, and if I need to enlarge it, maybe I can enlarge it here, because that's one of the things you can do here. Now this eye is coming a little closer towards us, so it could be a little larger, but it's always good to check things out. I'll flip back here, turn this on. Now, the next stage I would do is, so let's call this eye, let's just call that the eye layer. What I'm going to do next is make a new layer on top of the eye, and I'm going to make a clipping mask for that layer, because I'm going to do the iris part, okay? And so we'll make that darker like this. And, we could do an iris like this, okay? And that's a nice clean circle there. And doing the clipping mask, what it does is it prevents it from going in so far. I'm going to actually do this and hit the F6. Now, we don't want to do that up to that much, maybe this much. And then hit Alt Delete, and I see a little area that didn't get chosen there. That's this. Whoa, Command D. Okay. All right. So that's one way to make an eye. Now another way you can do this, and this is what I like to do before. And I'm grabbing my mouse. So if you're at a laptop computer, you can do this. You might be able to do this actually on a desktop computer using your tracking, your trackpad. But what I do is I'll get a hard round brush, make it to the size that I need it, okay? And then it won't work with my brush. If I do it with my brush, I get that. If I do it with my mouse, and mind you, my flow opacity is set to 100% here, I get that. And so that's usually what I'll do when I'm making an eye. And if I want to take the time to make the pupil, I can do the same thing here. But I'll get back. We could do that with the pupil later, okay? Anyway, so that's the next layer. The layer next would be under the nose and next to the face, because we're going to do the mustache layer and the eyebrow layer and the eyelash layer. So if we take a look at some pictures of Albert Einstein here, you don't really see, we don't see eyelashes per se. There is a darker contour around there. And so, what I'm going to do is sort of mimic that. And we're just going to come back to our drawing here. And this will be, we'll call this eyebrow, B-R-O-W, and mustache layer, okay? And I'm not going to even say eyelashes. So what we're going to need to do is keep that same dark color and get our brush, and let's get in here, and we can go back to this sharp brush here, and we're going to make and we can actually go in and make this little part of this line here too. We don't have to come out all the way because we want to paint some of that so it's a little softer. But generally what I like to do is, especially with men, I'll just do this versus doing eyelashes when I paint, so that we have a darker almost line or shadow, you could say, but that represents where his eyelashes are. Clean that up a little bit. Let's zoom in here, get this right. And if we want to, we could change the color so it's a little different from, or we could turn off the layer with that. Okay, that's nice. That's good. All right, we can turn back that layer again. So anyway, let's go over here, do the same thing. And, looking at your drawing, we'll even go outside a little bit for that wrinkle there. Really, it's not eyelash. It's more of a wrinkle if we look at the photograph. I mean, oh, didn't want to do that. Okay. All right. Well, once we get that done, on this layer, we are going to paint his eyebrows. And his eyebrows are really kind of bushy, and this is a good picture for his eyebrows and his mustache. Whoa, come down here. So we'll take a look at that as we're doing this, and I'm going to use the same brush here and kind of mimic some of the lines here. And let's just see, because like I was stating before in the drawing, it does, it feels like his eyelashes are pretty sparse. Like, it's almost like they got really trimmed, before they cover the entire eye. They're just not all the way there. And then we'll do the same thing over here. And I'm just using the same brush to kind of get this. And we can't see it as much because a lot of this is in shadow. We could always make corrections later if we need to. But what this allows us to do, by having the eyelashes and the eye and the in the eye and the pupil all on separate layers, is we can paint very quickly underneath that. Okay, so now let's do the mustache, and it's going to be much lighter here, and I'm just looking at some of the lines here and just try to mimic some of that, because the most important part is the edges of this. And I'm just sort of doing kind of rough here before I fill it all in. And then we're going to go underneath the nose, because this is underneath the nose layer. And we're going to use that nose shape to actually cut the mustache when we paint it, because we're going to end up painting the nose layer on the same layer. And I'm just trying to be as quickly as possible. It's the same layer as the face. That's what I was trying to say there, is we're going to paint the nose on the same layer as the face, but that nose is going to be used to select with. And I'm just doing this really super quickly because I've already have a version done. But, trying to get it to feel like his mustache, and seeing how much it kind of goes all the way up there, up underneath his nose there. So we can take it further up there like this. And mind you, we're going to cast that in shadow too, so it'll blend in better. But the next thing we're going to move on to is the hair. So I always say this is like the Mr. Potato Head, phase of doing this, because it looks like it, especially with that nose, because everything's on a floating layer. Now, if he had more lips, we would do them on a separate layer. Okay, but anyway, let's get to the hair, and we'll make a hair. We're going to do the hair on two separate layers. Okay, And the first layer is for the hair that's overlapping, okay? And then we're going to do a layer of hair underneath his face. And so, let's take a look at his hair over here. We'll zoom out quickly here. Okay, see that? Let me zoom out just a little bit more so we can minimize this window here. We'll take a look at that one. I like to look at this one too. And we're just looking at what his hair looks like, especially on top there. And we'll just get started, okay? So, the hair, especially if you zoom in just a little bit on this, you can see the hair kind of comes out of the head. So we're going to need to kind of do the same thing we're doing with the mustache. And we can do that like this. But I want to be a little quicker, so I'm going to make this brush much larger here and just do like this. Maybe some of his hair is going off that way, some of it's going off this way. And we're going to have to fill this in later. We'll try to fill it in like this. But also, I want to get to, and I'm just blocking this out like this. But one thing I like to do, and I'm going to switch brushes here, because I want to mimic this as much as possible, the contour of his hair. And this is a good method for like this for right now. And we can name this layer hair. Hair, there we go. All right, so I'm going to upload a set of brushes to our D2L that are not the Kyle brushes. And they're a set of brushes that was given to me a long time ago. And they're skin, hair, and fur brushes. And we've got several brushes here that really kind of mimic the feel of way hair is. And I think it does a better job than that brush right there, than what I was using, because we can do this. Now, the only thing is that the opacity of this, even though it's set for 100%, is a little lighter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have to duplicate this layer in just a moment, okay? But let's take a look here. So I like to try to get something, and mind you, we want this all filled in because we're going to paint it later. And you just kind of want to mimic the way his hair comes out of his head, like this. And let's look at this picture here. And this, I want to look at both of these. There we go. Okay. And see what I'm going to do for here. I'm trying to bear down as much as possible. And I don't really change the brush settings on this. But anyway, let me go through. Now, here's the deal here. We can actually switch brushes again in a moment, but the hair overlaps right here, but then then the ear overlaps over here. So the great thing I love about this brush, by the way, is this. Let's go hit the eraser key. The eraser, E for eraser, by the way, is what I use, and make this just a little bit brush. So unlike the Kyle brushes, you can actually use this as an eraser. So if you're making mistakes that need to be corrected, we can cut into the hair like this, okay? And that's so key there, because I think that's very important. And I love this brush over the Kyle hair brushes that are, I think there's some in the concept art brushes. Anyway, so let's select the face like that, and we'll hit Shift Command I, which is invert, okay? And that's very important there, is we want to invert that shape. And then we'll just go and get that Mr. Smoothie brush here for the moment and kind of go around like this. we're just trying to get some more of his hair here. Now let's go back and use the hairbrush. Okay, we'll use it. And see, this hairbrush is awesome because it really makes painting hair a lot easier. And I'm just taking these big swipes. Connect it together if possible. And we're gonna have to probably fill this in, but let's turn off our drawing so we can see what it looks like. And like I said, I'm gonna do Command D. Okay. Well, actually, before I do Command D, let's get this part right here. But what I find the problem is that this hairbrush is a little. It's not, even though it's set to 100% flow and opacity, because of its settings, it's not solid. So I'm going to copy the hair layer like this by dragging the hair layer down to the plus sign down here in the layers, if you see that, okay, on your screen. So you just drag your hair layer into that plus sign next to the trash can, and we'll duplicate that layer. And then what we'll do is we'll just combine these two layers, okay? And we'll select both of them, hold down the Shift key, and then do Command E, and that will duplicate that layer, and therefore that will make that much, it'll make it more opaque. So we won't be seeing through that later on. And I don't know, we'll go back to this Mr. Smoothie brush and make it really large and just fill this area in really quickly like this. And try to get any area out. But this should give you a good sense of how we should do this, okay? And you know, I don't even know if I need to finish this part, okay? Because we can move on to my finished one over here. My finished Mr. Potato Head, okay? So, let me look at this here. So what I've got going on here, I've got different layers. I've got the hair layer, of course. I got the pupils layers like I did before. I actually put in the pupil. I mean, it's really the iris layer, because the outer shape, the color of the eye is the iris, and the lens is the pupil. Anyway, I've got the eyes. I got the nose layer. I've got the mustache layer with all that. I got my face layer. I've got the hair. I did the hair behind the head like that. And then I have a jacket layer and a shirt layer and a tie layer. I'm going to do a vest on mine. You don't have to. I got a neck layer, and the neck layer is very important. So they're all overlapping each other so that they're very easy to deal with. They're 100% flow and opacity. We need to turn every one of these layers. We need to lock the pixels, so that when we start painting inside, the paint won't go outside the contour there, okay? The nose is not so important, and we're actually going to start with the nose. All right? And what we'll do is, I'm going to just select the nose and turn off the nose layer. And then the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to the eyebrows and mustache layer and hit that. Okay, and I misspelled mustache that time. Instead M-O-S is M-U-S, okay? So I'm going to keep that selected, and I'm going to come down to the face layer. And the main brushes we're going to be using are the general brushes in Photoshop. We're going to be using a lot of these soft round brushes, okay? And the key to doing this is we need to set it up so that the opacity and flow is set lower. So we're going to bring the opacity down to 30. I hit the 3 on my keyboard. By hitting the 3 on the keyboard, it turns it to 30. Now, if you hold down the Shift key and hit another number, I'm going to hit 4. That makes it 40, so my flow is 40%. And as I was stating before in the digital ink and painting tutorial, flow and opacity. Opacity is, of course, how opaque something is. Can we see through it? Flow is how much paint is coming out at one time, okay? And so let's just, like I said, I'm looking at these pictures here, and we'll start with the nose, And I'm going to use black to start with. And what we can do is once we paint a little bit of black, we can actually use our eyedropper. And if you're on your brush tool, you don't need to switch to eyedropper. You just hold down your Alt or Alt key, okay? By hitting your Alt key, it turns it into an eyedropper. When you click off your Alt or your Option key, that is, because both the words are written on them for my keyboard, it goes back to being a brush. And what we're doing is we're just going to paint in his nose first. And like I said, this contour right here is so important. And that's why I did this. Might just shade it a little bit more here. And then I'm going to pick up the eyedropper for the mustache and just sort of paint the bridge of the nose. Okay. And I'm being a little more sloppy than I normally would, but you get the general idea here. See how fast that was to paint? It's so fast. I'm going to do Command D, which is deselect. So therefore I can start to actually paint here. And we'll pick off this darkest color I just was painting with. And let me check my brush here for a second, because it seems like, yeah, I got shape dynamics on. I'm going to turn my shape dynamics off. All right. You've got different things here. You can go to brush tip and bring in the spacing. So there's no more spacing there. It gets a lot tighter. I didn't bring it all the way down. But anyway, now we can kind of, work like this. And I'm just going to make my brush smaller for smaller detail, because I'm going to do above his eye, and then taking a look at it, goes down this way. Now, I can turn on my drawing while I'm working here, okay? And we'll turn it off and on as we're working. I'm going to get right here. And I'm actually going to select that darkest part of that pupil there. Or you could do, hit the D key, and it will bring, if you hit the D key, it brings up default fill and stroke. And so black is sitting on top there, okay? And maybe it doesn't get that dark underneath there. More like that, perhaps. But see, this is why I have all these layers, so that I can actually paint it's just so much faster to paint this way. And by lowering that flow and opacity, it's not coming out all so fast. We can actually control it. And we can always hit the Alt key to get the eyedropper, so we can pick off color here. And look how fast this goes. It really goes rapidly fast as we block him out. And I usually try to do some bigger areas first, like this. Now, if we need to, we can come back, select some color there, and make the brush smaller and get that little highlight in there. I'm going to make my brush bigger again. And so anyway, I don't want to paint over the nose. So let's go to the nose layer here. Hold down the Command key, click on the icon for the nose. It'll select it, okay? And then do Shift Command I, and that will inverse the selection, okay? I'm going to do Command H. Now, what that does is it hides the selection. So now, therefore, I can paint like this here, okay? And that just makes my job a lot easier. I got to remember, though, because a lot of times I'll be painting and I'll forget that I hit it, and I forget that's a selection there, and then I'll try to paint inside the nose and it won't go right. So do Command D, and that will deselect. All right, we'll do some shading up under here and actually kind of get his lip there, shading there. Let's just make our brush really big, and we'll do some big areas here. Like this. I usually like to do it like really broad areas, and then I come in for the detail. Okay, let's turn off the drawing for a second and take a look. We can pick up our eyedropper. And see, that's what I love working this way. Okay, it's so fast, and I think that you generally get what I'm doing here. Now, for doing wrinkles and things, one thing we could do is get much smaller, and we'll fix that right there, and just make your brush really tiny, or you can go in here and pick another brush like this. This is soft with pressure size to it, and we'll hit the D key so we're painting with black there. And I'm just looking at these photographs, and we can also turn our drawing again if we need to see what things look like, if there's anything we want to put in there. But a lot of this I'll just look at the photograph from here on out, and I go to my drawing when I need to. Okay, this part here, the thing about your brushes is that you can actually make them harder in Photoshop. That's one thing I like about Photoshop over Procreate, is you can come in here and make a brush a slight bit harder. And what I need that for is that shadow that goes up to the chin here. And I want that much sharper. And let's see my drawing to see where it's at really. Okay, something like that. Okay, now let's keep that color and we'll soften it, and therefore we can just blend everything out here. The other thing you can do too is, if you need to blend something, is come over to your smudge tool. Okay, and my smudge tool is at 15% strength. We'll raise it a bit here, but your smudge tool, it's just like it's smudging. You may have learned about it before, but you can use it when you need it. Okay, so this kind of gives you an idea of how to paint this, but I want to get to painting the hair. Okay, because that's the hardest part of painting. You generally get an idea of what I'm doing here. I can come back in here and paint the highlights in and stuff like that, but I think you kind of get an idea of what I'm doing here. So let's go up to the hair layer here, and let's take a look at his hair. So it took me years to really learn how to paint hair fast, because like most people, having that hairbrush, I would use that hairbrush and paint a bunch of hair and then just keep using it, and that makes it tedious and slow. The painting I showed you, by the way, the finished painting here that I did this afternoon. I did it in under an hour and a half. That's how fast this technique is, okay? And it may take you a little longer because you're learning this technique. But anyway, let me continue on. So on the hair layer, make sure you lock the pixels. We're going to get that soft round brush. And first of all, it's good to work with the general overall shading. The parts in the hair that are shaded, okay? And then we can get into the detail. And I'm going to paint over some of this nice light. And I'm going to sample in there so it makes it a little bit darker. Because these highlights will paint in, like these, they're not really highlights, but they're lighter parts of the hair. We'll paint those in with a hairbrush, okay? And so it's best to start with big overall arching kinds of shapes to kind of get the shading on him, okay? Like that. And even, here, like this. And therefore, we can go in and now we'll pick another brush here. We'll pick this soft round brush with that's pressure sensitive. This one right here. And you can always turn a brush like this on by clicking this one right here, because this will make sure that this brush. And what I like about it is it's a soft round brush. Let's zoom in here so you can see what I'm doing. It's a soft round brush that can come to a point. So I can go in here and start, and a lot of time it's the color, or the value, I should say. It's the value you need to think about, looking at the picture, and then how how much the flow and the opacity set at. Some students I know used to set the flow and the opacity so low it would take them forever to do it. And, it's like you want the flow and opacity so that, when you make a stroke, it looks great, So, don't set your flow and opacity down to 5% unless you really, really have to in a certain situation. So let me continue on here. Like I said, this technique is great because, if you're trying to figure out how to shade something, it just makes things a lot faster. And like I said, with the hair, I used to spend hours on hair. And finally, after learning how to do hair, it makes it a lot easier. I will tell you this much. When you do your project, as far as picking a person because I'm going to, like I said before in my other tutorial, my project for this will be you picking out a character, either a fictional character, it could be like Santa Claus or Ebenezer Scrooge, or it could be a superhero, not somebody that's masked up like Spider-Man that you can't see them, okay? But someone you can see their face. And Wonder Woman's good. She's always good to paint. I actually did one of her a long time ago, and I probably need to go back and do it again, just because my skills have strengthened and that painting's okay. But anyway, when you do that, I'll be honest with you, anyone with light color hair is a lot harder to paint than someone with darker hair. Anyone with black hair, it's a lot easier to deal with. So let's zoom out here and see what this looks like. And I know it doesn't look great yet, but let's go back here and we're going to pick one of these lighter colors, and we're just going to, let's take off that right there, that part right there where it makes this pressure size, okay? And I'm just putting in some more shades in here a little bit, because I've done this before. I know what I need it to look like. Let's take a look at this photograph and see if I need to get any darker. And then once we do this, we'll just get that hairbrush. Go down here and get this hairbrush right here. This triple dot hairbrush, which is awesome. And we'll just use white to start with, okay? So if I hit the D key, it'll go to default fill and stroke with the black being on top and the white is the background color. Hit the X key, that will bring the white forward. And therefore we can start painting. And let's bring the flow and opacity up to 100%, okay? And just see if it's too much, we can always take the flow and opacity down. I'm going to make this brush much larger. But you can see there, it's really cool because now this begins to, as we add these things in, it starts to look, and I'm not bearing down so hard because it is pressure sensitive. But see, this is what makes it look like hair. And then we can go in and do some darker strokes here. And it's so much faster than trying to do it by doing all these little hairs to begin with. And so, and see, it starts to look like hair. It's amazing by putting a few of those in there. And then let's go and pick some of the darker color up, and we'll put a few of those strokes in. And next thing you know, we have hair. And I'm just going about here and looking what looks good. All right, so the problem with his hair, I say it's a problem because it's interesting, is see, our hair has a nice hard edge, which is great. But his hair looks all fuzzy. So I'm going to unlock the pixel layer there, okay? And what I'm going to do is we're going to get a soft round brush again and make it large. Lower the opacity and flow. I'm going to lower it down to 20 this time, and the flow is going to be at 30, okay? And we're going to pick up one of these grays over here, and we're just going to lightly paint along the edge so it makes his hair look a little fuzzier. so it doesn't look like it's so sharp, okay? You don't want to go too crazy with this. And then also we can do is get this hairbrush here, pick up some of that same color, and kind of go outside and do the edges like this, okay? And this will give you a sense of how to do hair faster. And mind you, the hairbrush is set down to 20% flow and opacity. I might bring up the opacity up to 50%. You know, I'm just trying to do these edges first, so he doesn't have to be super fuzzy, but we just don't want it to look so sharp. And see, that starts to look decent, okay? So anyway, that should give you a good idea of what we're doing here. Let me go and see if we need to do anything else, because I've got this in stages here, okay? That's the finished version. Let me go back onto my desktop here and see what I've got here. I should have a Grayscale 2. There it is. Grayscale 2 is here. But I think, I painted all the way over it, which is fine, you know. So I thought I had something in between, and I didn't save an in between part. But anyway, as you can see here, I went to different layers. The lapel, let's paint a little bit. I want to talk about his jacket, because I actually have a texture on his jacket. And so let's go back into the one I'm working on here. And we're going to go down to, and we'll lock the hair pixels just in case we need to paint inside there later on. But let's go down to the jacket layer. And I have a background layer for color, so you're going to need to make that so that you can fill it. I wouldn't fill it with 100% black. I'd fill it with some. Okay, and you can see I got shading under the mustache. I've got my highlights in there. I put in a highlight in his eye. You know, all that stuff with the eye is just all nice. It's the round airbrush, you know. It's the soft airbrush will do most of what you need to do. But anyway, I want to talk about his jacket, because you know, if you're gonna, you need to put him in something. You can put him in a sweater, okay, and that's fine. You know, he doesn't need to be wearing a sports, you know, a suit jacket. But anyway, we'll get, you know, a dark color here like this, and just kind of start making some of the general shapes here. And I'm going to make my opacity 30, my flow at 40, and make sure I've got nothing selected here. Oh, I'm on the background layer. That's what I was wondering. Okay. All right. So, you know, if it helps, you can take a look at this jacket here, which is what I looked at when I was doing this, to get a sense of, well, first of all, there's a shadow his head is casting, okay? And then we've got a shadow for where his kind of his arm is at. Now, if it's too dark, you just sample in between. That's what I love about this brush tool. And I almost prefer this over the Procreate, you know, where you select color, because that color picker sometimes is hard to get. Sometimes it disappears on me when I'm working in Procreate. And, you know, in Photoshop, you just hit the Alt key or the Option key, and boom, you've got your eye picker, your eyedropper, that is, and, you know, you just go to town working, okay? So, now, I did not put his lapel in yet, okay? His lapel I drew in as a path, like this, okay? And so what I'm going to do is let's load that selection, because I showed you how to draw paths before. And remember, in case you forgot, let me do this here. If we need to draw a lapel, I'll just do it quickly because it's very quick to do here. We get the pen tool, and we set it to path, okay? Not shape. I had one student doing it as a shape. You don't want to do it as a shape, okay? You want to do it as a path, so we can load the selection. It works just like Illustrator. The only exception is when you go back to kill the second handle, to delete that second handle, you have to hold down the Alt key, okay? And let's just extend our picture a little bit so we can see. And then we can go straight across here. Go up like that, go up like that. And I love the pen tool, you know. When I need it comes in so handy for so many things, especially if you're trying to do something that has sharp edges. And they need to be nice curved edges because it saves time, you know. And you could actually use the pen tool if you needed to draw in the shapes of the face if it makes it easier, okay? So anyway, if it's a work path we needed to double click, I'm just going to keep it that name. And we'll load that up. And what we're going to do is just do some painting. We're going to do Shift-Command-I because that inverses it. And then I'm going to get my brush tool and I'm going to paint in these shadows like that. Maybe, well, I'm trying to paint there. That's not going to work. All right, let's do Shift-Command-I again and do Command-H so we can see and let's turn off our drawing there so we can see what we got there. All right. And now, when I did Shift-Command-I, we are inside here, so now we can bring that part of the lapel out, and maybe something more here, and something more there. I'm not going to get too picky with this. I just want to kind of show you how do I get texture. Now, I'm not going to get the exact same texture that's in the photograph, but I'm going to get a texture on him, okay? I just want to do a little bit of painting because it's good to have some value in here before we add a texture. Just makes it look better. Shift-Command-I again. And so we invert that. Pick up this darker color. Maybe even have a shadow up under here. Under here. And then I'm going to do Command-D, and that's close enough. You know, I could keep working on that. But what I'm going to do to get texture is, you know, you don't paint texture on top of the... First you do your shading, and then if you want texture, you need to make another layer. And this other layer here, we're going to actually make a clipping mask. Okay? So we're going to create clipping mask for that layer. Now, there's all kinds of brushes. And whatever kind of texture you want, you need to do some experimenting and go through. The legacy brushes have some really great things here. And in order to get your legacy brushes up, you go up under here and bring up your legacy brushes, okay? And they've got all kinds of faux brushes like this. You know, I didn't even use this one. I'm just curious here. Anyway, maybe I use this. See, what I did was, and we'll zoom in here to see what this looks like. Ooh, that's nice. I might use this. The only thing is it gets, if we can do this at 100% flow and opacity, okay, and we'll pick up a darker color here. And it does that. I'm just curious. Let's make this big. Yeah, the only problem is this may not be the best brush. I'm just showing you like some different brushes that there's up under here. Do Command-A, hit delete. I'm just seeing what they got here. Like I said, it's just good to you're going to have to practice. I know what brush I'm going to use. I'm going to use it in just a moment. But I just wanted to show you all these legacy brushes. And in order to get texture, you just got to have to kind of experiment. And I might be able to get a decent texture with one of these. You know, I'm just going to paint really over this. But let's set this, and this is what I'm going to do. Set this to multiply. And then let's lower the opacity a lot. And this might not be a bad brush for his jacket. It gives it an interesting texture. I might use this more for a sweater, perhaps. But anyway, that's one brush. And here's the deal. We can keep using different brushes. So we can turn that one off. And I'm going to go use the one that I had used for it, for my earlier one. go create clipping mask. That's what I was looking for. Okay, so I turn that layer off, made a new layer on top. The brush I'm using for this, I just wanted to show you because there's a ton of brushes over here. And I mean, there's just so many brushes up under the... If you ever need a square brush, by the way, this is where the square brushes are at, okay? I just want to point that out to you because, you know, a lot of people just don't know about them. And that's... The legacy brushes were the original Photoshop brushes they used to include, all right? So let's go down, and I'm going to upload... where are they at here? Rakes. Now, you got halftone brushes too. Those are cool. But I found a rake brush that I really liked called Snake. And it took me a while that's what took me the longest to do that. And under the shape dynamics, I need to turn this so that it goes... Angle jitter is direction. Because if I don't do that and I try to go this way, that's what it looks like. So if I turn this to direction... Now I can go this way, okay? And so let's I don't know, I'm going to hit the F key just to make it faster here. So what the F key does is, by the way, if you hit the F key, it cycles through like this. And so it makes it much easier to paint. One other thing I want to tell you is if you hit the tab key by mistake in Photoshop, it'll take away everything. Just want to let you know that in case you hit that by accident. Years ago, and I'm talking about 30 years ago, I hit the tab key and I was lost for a long time, and I had to call up a friend of mine going, okay, everything disappeared. I don't know what's going on. And he goes, okay, what did you do? I said, put a book down. And so he just started hitting keys, and he goes, oh, try the tab key. So I just want to let you know. And tab key is useful for when you want to eliminate those things. So let's set this to multiply. Okay. And we're going to crisscross. And lower our opacity down a lot. So I get a nice kind of crisscrossing thing going over here. I could load up, like, I could separate out the lapel by loading up the selection there. I'm not going to do that just to save time, but I could paint the jacket and the lapel texture separately. But I just want to put these in real quick. And you think to yourself, oh, that looks, it does look like texture, but there is another couple of steps I want to do here to it. One is that texture is very overpowering. And, if I'm going to lock the pixels for a moment here, we can actually, if I lock the pixels, I can fill it with black if I want to. So it's a little darker, okay? So that became all black, and then we can lower the opacity some more. But what I want to do is, I want to make a mask. And what the mask will let me do is, it lets me erase out stuff without destroying stuff. I think we may have talked about this before in another tutorial. But why I want the mask set up, and I'll set my opacity and flow on my brush. I'm using a soft round brush, okay? I'm going to set my opacity to 30% and my flow to 40. And therefore, I can kind of erase out where the highlights are. So the texture kind of, it's not as much in those highlight areas, okay? Now, that's one thing we can do. The other thing we can do, too, is we can go and do Command T. Now, I'm on, when you're in the mask, you got to make sure you go back to the actual layer, okay? So there's a difference between the layer and the mask. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do Command T, and then I'm going to hit this little button right up here. So this is where we can warp it. And we'll do it 5x5. And we can begin to warp this texture so it kind of conforms to his suit a little bit better. And that's something that is useful. And you don't always have to use multiply. There's a bunch of different blending modes. And in my concept art class, I have my students do a shading and texture exercise where we do some basic shapes, like spheres and cubes and cones, and then I talk about how to shade those things because it's very useful to know how to shade those things, especially if you're trying to shade from your imagination. And anyway, the second part is adding texture and finding different brushes and looking at pictures of textures and doing them on a separate layer, masking it out, and warping it if needed. Okay, so by warping it, it kind of makes it more interesting. It makes it doesn't look so flat on there, and therefore I'll hit that again. So that's how we do that texture. Okay, and let's hit the F key a couple more times there, and so I think I've covered everything I did to paint this. Okay, and I did paint a little bit in the background, just softly, so that when we color it, it won't be just flat, right? And so you want to do a good job with this part, because the next part is very simple, very easy. Coloring it makes it so simple. You should save this so it's a separate file here, because it's good to always save as. And actually, you know what? Let's go to that one's already saved. So let's go to here. Let's go to save as, the one I was painting on, Einstein Grayscale. Okay, and you could put your name on it. You could do your name like that. Save it as a PSD file and hit save. Okay, and so I hope this helps you out. I hope this gives you enough information about how to shade your Einstein drawing. And look to the next tutorial, okay, for coloring.